Okay, so Iron Man 2 and Avengers Endgame. I'm gonna go out on a limb here and just, make a crazy wild assumption that the vast majority of people, maybe 99% of the population, thinks Avengers Endgame is a better movie than Iron Man 2. For those of you out there who think Iron Man 2 is better than Avengers Endgame, well, respect to you because I'm certainly not one of them, but yeah, I'm just gonna make a blanket assumption here and say the vast majority of people think Avengers Endgame is better than Iron Man 2. However, you've read the title of this video. I do believe that there is one critical mistake that would have elevated both of those movies to greater heights, and they both make the exact same mistake. Now, if you guys have been following the channel for a little bit, you may be able to guess what that is, because I've talked about it and I've briefly mentioned it before in a bunch of different videos. So here's the gist. Let's think back to Iron Man 2. One of the biggest problems that I had with the film, and granted, I do think that there is a good film hidden under there, and I'm going to try to extract it today by trying to fix the problem that I think Iron Man 2 suffers from, the primary problem anyways, but I do think that there is a good film in there. However, if you remember from my review, one of the biggest problems about this film that I think there is that there are just too many storylines going on. Just pick one. Of course, subplots are fine, but if you don't have subplots that connect in a reasonable, sustainable, satisfying way, then it doesn't work to benefit the movie. Now, one of the subplots that seemed to raise a lot of eyebrows, both for good and bad reasons, was the idea that Tony would be suffering from an alcohol problem in Iron Man 2. This is not a new thing based on the comic books. There is a very famous story called Demon in a Bottle where Tony deals with alcohol problems. And alcoholism is a very serious issue. It is a very heavy piece of subject material. And as we know, the MCU likes to deal with light things like, for example, Thor v Hulk in an arena, which is presided over by Jeff Goldblum. Or a guy who wears a costume and shrinks down to the size of an ant and is called Ant-Man. Needless to say, the MCU does know how to bring levity to its films, and a lot of its films don't really necessarily delve into the heavier subject materials, but there are a couple that do, and, well, a lot of the times they miss the mark, but we'll get back to that later. Iron Man 2 is the third film in the MCU, so it's actually really interesting to me that they decide to delve into this problem very early on, one of the more heavy subject materials like I mentioned before. However, Iron Man 2 makes a mistake. There is this idea of concept versus execution, where something can be really, really good in your mind before you put it onto paper, and where you're thinking about it and you go, yeah, this is going to be great, this is going to work out so well. And then you actually start executing it and you realize, maybe it didn't work out so well. The idea of tackling a very heavy subject material can be very good for films. For example, a film like Logan deals with this idea of the loss of a will to live. As you can see, Hugh Jackman's Logan really struggling to find purpose in his life. He's clinging onto that last thread. This is a very serious and a very heavy topic. And it deals with that very, very delicately. It's a very, very fragile issue. Iron Man 2 deals with Tony's alcoholism by writing it off as a joke. And that's the problem. Now, I don't want to get too heavy here. This is an entertainment channel. I'm bringing you guys my thoughts on the biggest movies that come out of Hollywood, and I don't want to get too heavy here. So I'm just, going to keep it pretty surface level here. But as you probably know, alcoholism is not something that goes away overnight. This idea that Tony, who is a billionaire, genius, playboy, philanthropist, has a drinking problem, it's actually a pretty interesting concept. Because, of course, somebody with that amount of wealth and that amount of power would have some self-destructive tendencies. You see a little bit more of that in Iron Man 3 when he's dealing with PTSD. And granted, Iron Man 3 doesn't deal with it really well either, but I think it does a little bit better job. A little bit. But let's look at the party scene in Iron Man 2. This is the film's attempt to portray Tony Stark's drinking problem as real.
The question I get asked most often is, Tony, how do you go to the bathroom in the suit? Just like that.
Now, I get it, Jon Favreau. You want to make a movie that appeals to the mass audiences, and so if younger kids are watching the film, you don't want them to see an actual person with a drinking problem because that's scary to kids. I get it. That's fair. But then why are you including it at all? Is it not enough to have Tony having an existential crisis because there is poisoning in his palladium arc reactor? I feel like the alcoholism was sort of just a nod to the demon in the bottle. Like they just kind of wanted to nod to that storyline, but they didn't really want to do anything with it. If you're going to make that story be part of your movie, commit to it. Or don't. It's fine either way. I don't have an opinion. If you were going to cut that out or if you're going to make that the center problem of the movie, I don't have a preference as long as the execution works. But the fact that they were so lukewarm on this idea and they just tried to write it off as a joke with this terrible, terrible party scene, it's one of the worst scenes in the MCU in my opinion, it makes it all feel for nothing. By mitigating the problem of alcoholism. It shows that Marvel wasn't ready and maybe isn't ready to deal with these heavy real world issues. It's showing that no, these are superhero movies. These are fun, entertaining movies, but we're not really going to touch on the real world things. We'll just leave that for other people. And that's fine. But again, just don't attempt to deal with it at all then. Don't try to be lukewarm and try to portray it in a false way. Because when kids look at Iron Man 2 and think drinking problem, that's what they're going to think of, this party scene. So Avengers Endgame. You can probably tell where this is going, right? Let's talk about Endgame Thor. Survivor's guilt, for those of you who don't know, is a very real thing, and it's kind of what the Russo brothers were going for with Endgame Thor. I'm going to read the definition of survivor's guilt from the internet. It is a condition of persistent mental and emotional stress experienced by someone who has survived an incident in which others died. That pretty much fits Endgame Thor perfectly. And as with other traumatic events, people with survivor's guilt try to generally cope with it in some way. Whether it be trying to form new relationships, trying to move on with their lives, and in some cases, binge eating and binge drinking, like Endgame Thor. Again, this is a very, very serious issue. So when the Russo brothers said in later interviews after Endgame was released that we wanted to go for something completely different with Thor, I am totally on board with that idea. I am so on board with that idea. I think just taking these characters and doing new and unexpected things with them, that is a good thing. That is a creative thing to do. But shock value for shock value's sake isn't always what's warranted. Of course I was surprised to see Thor being overweight and having a drinking problem in Endgame. Of course I was. Nobody was expecting that. And honestly, I think it's a good thing. Because yes, it makes sense. Thor was this close to saving the entire half of the universe. And he couldn't do it. But what does Marvel do? They make him a joke. Now granted, there is a little bit of a better handling of this situation than in Iron Man 2. He has a conversation with his mom, and they kind of reconcile. And he reconciles the fact that maybe he is not meant to be the person that everyone thinks he is. That's good. That's one of the best parts of that Endgame Thor arc. But why was Endgame Thor just used for comedic purposes when he was really going through something? That scene in Asgard where Rocket is talking to Thor, and Thor's like, I'm having an anxiety attack. Watch this scene again. It's not meant to be dramatic. It's meant to be funny. Why?
I think I'm having a panic attack.
Come here. Right here.
Endgame is a serious film. Guys, half of the universe died. And I understand, because probably the underlying reason for this was because Kevin Feige and Bob Iger saw the cut of Avengers Endgame and Iron Man 2, and they went, no, we can't have kids seeing an actual person who is being drunk or an actual person who is dealing with PTSD and anxiety. It's just not good for kids. And I'm not blaming them for that. But this lukewarm interpretation of real-world struggles that people go through and portraying them as being funny of all things, I just can't get behind that. To me, I don't want Endgame Thor to be gone and the Infinity Thor to be back in Thor Love and Thunder because I just hate the idea of him being overweight. I have no problem with that. I hate that they're making him a joke. And I didn't like the Iron Man 2 party scene because I hated that they were making him a joke. These are real-world struggles that people go through, and we should respect that. So what do you guys think of Avengers Endgame and Iron Man 2's handling of these very serious issues? Let me know in the comments down below. If you like this video, then make sure to subscribe and hit the like button to support the channel. Thank you guys so much for the support. It means the world to me. And if you want to check out some more videos, check out the videos on the screen right now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.